The Seiko SKX013 is probably the most well-known medium-sized diver from Seiko. With the 38mm case size, you would assume that it is the only mid-sized diver from Seiko. Before it came into fruition though, the Seiko 4205 was the only medium-sized diver you could buy, except maybe the Mini Apocalypse, which I reviewed previously, but that one was smaller. The Seiko 4205 movement is used mostly on ladies' dive watches, specifically the 4205-0140 series. Now these are tiny watches, and we'll get back to those in a minute. Today, we will be comparing the SKX013 to the 4205-0155, also known as the SUG095. There are a lot of reference numbers of the 4205. There's also a 4205-0156, 4205-0150, 0152, 0153, and I can't really tell the difference from them. From what I understand, it is a possibility that the 4205-155 watch that we have here right now is the international version, and the 4205-156 is the Japanese version, with the Suwa logo on the case back and a text Japan under the 6 o'clock marker. On the other hand, the Pepsi version, yes, there is a Pepsi version of this watch, the 4205-015T, which has a T there instead of a digit at the end of the reference. Now we are seeing a pattern. If you have watched my pre-SKX video on the 7002, we would then speculate that if the reference number ends in a letter, it most probably has a Pepsi bezel insert. The Japan version is the 4205-015V, this time a letter V at the end instead of a T. Now it is easy to be confused, but if ever there's someone out there with knowledge about these watches, please comment down below what is the difference on these 4205 reference numbers. The SKX013 and the 4205 have the same case shape, and you might think they can be interchanged, but the subtle differences make them unique, such as the bezel action. The 4205 has a ball bearing, which turns bidirectionally, which is located on this side of the case, right there. And the SKX013 has a click spring, obviously unidirectional. There's also a difference on the bezel insert. On the SKX013, the loom pip is much smaller, and the 4205 is much wider and flatter. Another difference is on the crown. The 4205 has a design language of the 6105-8110 Apocalypse Now watch. I have to say though, the SKX013 has a better grip to it. This one feels slippery. The bracelets on these watches can be interchanged. I'm not sure if the 4205 was sold with a bracelet. I think it looks good. 20mm lug width and is a strap monster for sure. In this example though, my SKX is on a solid Jubilee. This one is on a folded. So yeah, the solid one really feels nicer and much more comfortable on the wrist. So I'll just put out the specs here, and you can see, besides the case size, the SKX013 is much thinner compared to the 4205 due to the protruding case back, which is thick. The lug-to-lug is also noticeable. You can see where the case extends there, right before the crown. The 4205 is much shorter on that area as compared to the SKX013 right there. So that's why the 4205 kind of wears a bit smaller, a bit shorter compared to the SKX013, which actually I think the 4205 looks more well proportioned. Now let's get to the dial, which will be the most crucial part if ever you're choosing between the two. The SKX013 dial is more derived from the original 6159-7000 series, with the round R markers combined with the oval 6 and 9 with the inverted triangle 12 R marker. Just looks classic and timeless. The 4205 is much more utilitarian in a sense, more sharp looking, much more derived from the 6217-8000 62 mass with rectangular R markers. It actually looks proportionate because of the integrated date window there on the 3 o'clock, which is difficult to see, especially at the arm's length. So sometimes I just don't adjust the date on this one because it is so hard to see. Even my camera can't focus that close. Yeah, 27 rare. So you can choose between 150 meters of water resistance to 200 meters of water resistance, which won't really matter if you don't dive. There's one thing that I should point out though. I really like the way the minute track, or the chapter ring, whatever you want to call it, grooves right there on the SKX013 on the 3 o'clock. It just looks premium to my eyes, and the lines on the minute track are much longer, which makes it easier to tell the time compared to the 4205. It's much shorter, as you can see there. Okay, let's talk about this 4205 movement. So as you can see, it is a very minute movement. The 7S26 you're already familiar with. This one though is an unusual movement if you've never seen this watch before. So this is used also in the women's version, which is this one. I'll quickly show you the size comparison there. So this is 38, this is 33 millimeters, and they have the same movement. So this is the 4205 right there. Yeah, the only difference is that the larger one has a case or a movement holder right there. If I remove that, which I'll just show you quickly, I'll remove it. Okay, so this is what it looks like with the movement holder removed. As you can see, it is really a tiny movement. And this one just kind of conceals that it is a tiny movement. Yeah, so now that I have a couple more examples here. This is a women's 4205 dive watch. That's the size difference right there. So this movement was produced around 1976 through 1992. That's a good amount of watches being made during that time. So just a quick spec sheet of this watch. 40 hours of power reserve, 21,600 vibrations per hour, and has an accuracy rate of plus 55 minus 35 seconds per day. Now that we've got that out of the way, I'll give you my verdict on these watches. The 4205 has a much better wearability compared to the SKX013 because of that lug-to-lug distance. I don't know, it just feels more proportionate overall. I know I keep saying that. The lollipop secondhand looks nice. However, the date complication can be a bit useless at times as it is so small. But I would much prefer a date only, but this is just too small to be useful. The SKX013 is a much modern watch with the date complication. I think the dial is just a nicer one. The bezel click is more satisfying, much better lume since it's newer. I don't want to say the 4205 is an alternative to the SKX since it is also unique on its own. To wrap it up, the 4205-0155 is not that expensive on its own, just difficult to find an original one, around $150 to $200. The SKX013 is much more on the premium price. For me, I think the SKX013 wins here. Despite the 4205's exceptional size, the SKX just has a certain desirability to it. On its own, the 4205 is a decent watch, man, but being a Seiko collector is just hard. The amount of watches they have with the different models and types, and we're just talking about the vintage watches here. It is a deep money pit, I tell you. Anyway, I'm glad to be able to share with you guys these watches. There are just a few videos about the 4205, and if you have any information to share about this watch, please share down below. There's just so much we don't know about these vintage watches. I'll see you soon. Stay safe.